Welcome, everyone. My name is Mary Koshi, and welcome to our Office for Disabilities virtual speaker series in recognition of Disability Awareness Month. I just want to point out some logistics for you. We are being recorded today, and also if you need closed captioning, if you go to your Zoom toolbar and if you see the CC button, you can go there and click on show subtitles, and you'll be able to see closed captioning for you today. So I am going to share my screen with you, and we have with us today Dr. Angela Riccobono. She's the Director of Rehabilitation Neuropsychology at the Department of Rehabilitation and Human Performance. I also want to let you know that the Q&A, excuse me, the Q&A function is available to you throughout the session. So feel free to jump in, put in your comments or your questions, and we'll do our best to answer them throughout the session. We want today's session to be very interactive and engaging. And so I think that's it. And then we'll leave a couple of minutes at the end, a few minutes at the end for any last minute questions as well. So I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Riccobono.
Thank you so much, Mary, and thank you to the Office of Diversity and Inclusion for having us today. In addition to me speaking, I'm going to be joined by two very special people who are living with spinal cord injuries, Yesenia Torres and Woody Wood. And they're here to actually provide a personal perspective on what we'll be talking about. So next slide, please. So the first thing I thought about when I was thinking about Disability Awareness Month is actually how many awareness months there actually are now. And it's not uncommon when I look at the calendar to see maybe 2 or 3 different groups having awareness months. And I think the word awareness in itself starts to kind of lose some of its potency when it's used so often. So I thought it might make sense to take a moment and talk about what exactly is awareness and why does it even matter. So the first part is, what is awareness? And maybe to just take a moment and reflect on that. It's the state of knowing and of being informed. And it's the state of being conscious of something. And there's a particular type of awareness that I think is relevant. It's called social awareness. And that's the ability to understand others and the relationships you have with them. Next slide, please. Okay, so why is that even important? Why does awareness matter? Well, it gives us insight into our beliefs. And it's our beliefs that really drive, how we behave, our assumptions about other people, about ourselves. It allows us to see from the perspective of others, which fosters empathy and compassion, which I think in today's world is exceptionally important. And awareness precedes action. So people don't change the way they behave, they don't change the way they think, unless they're first aware that an issue exists. And importantly, I'd like to say that people often make mistakes because they don't know the right way to do something. I don't think people go out of their way to be mean to people with disabilities. I think very often they just don't know what to say or do. And there's actually something we'll touch on later called disability etiquette, which will speak to some of that. Next slide, please. And I think, Maya Angelou is one of my favorite authors, poets, and she says, and I think she captures it beautifully, I did then what I knew how to do. Now that I know better, I do better. And I think that is why awareness is important, that we all tend to kind of operate on our assumptions that we don't often challenge because they're our assumptions and our belief systems. But once you know better, then you can do better. And our job here is to get people, by raising awareness, is to get them to know better so they can do better. Next slide, please. Okay, so when I was thinking about this, I was thinking, well, okay, that's good, but how do we actually increase awareness? Well, visibility increases awareness. Accessibility increases visibility. And inclusion decreases isolation and loneliness. So if you've never seen a person in a wheelchair, you're not likely going to be very aware of who they are, what they're capable of, what they can do. So when things became accessible, people started to see more people out in the world, and it started to raise awareness. Next slide, please. And this is a little bit of a wordy slide, but it's such a significant event that I couldn't let it pass. The ADA, or the Americans with Disability Act, was signed into law in 1990. And it was the first law that actually banned discrimination against people with disabilities in the community, in the workplace, on transportation, and in schools. And that was life altering for people with disabilities. You know, it's hard even to remember because it was 1990, it's 30 years now, but I remember before people could get on a bus, you know, or people could get into restaurants or buildings or libraries or schools, and the isolation that occurred from that type of discrimination was profound. And the ADA changed a great deal the physicality of the world, and that brought people out into the world and increased their visibility. However, and I think Woody and Yesenia will agree with me on this, visibility is not enough. You know, people see people in wheelchairs, but I think the next step is that we need to change people's mentality, people's consciousness. And if you remember back, you know, awareness, the definition was about being conscious of something. And I take this, you know, very personally. I also am a psychologist. I'm a rehab psychologist, and I work on the inpatient unit here at Sinai in the spinal cord injury unit. And we teach people not to be defined by their disability, but by their possibilities. But then they go out into the world, and if society only sees limitations, then we have a problem. Next slide, please. This picture here and this quote was actually, I was reading the Sunday Times, and there was a whole page on people going back to work with disabilities. And it's a woman in a wheelchair riding the bus. And she says, "I don't think our society is more open to people with disabilities now. I think we're just more in your face." And I think that really struck me. And it's what I'm talking about, that, okay, you know, ADA changed the fact that people can now get on bus, they're more visible, but are they more open? And to me, that's almost synonymous with awareness. People becoming open means they have to become more aware. Next slide, please. This quote was taken from another article in the New York Times about a restaurant that just opened up in Manhattan called Contento, which is a restaurant that was opened by two people in wheelchairs. And it was a review of that restaurant. And this woman, who is in a wheelchair, made the comment that 99% of restaurants may call themselves accessible, but they're not. And restaurants I found to be a good example of how ADA is not enough. The way it is now, accessibility is not enough. So restaurants and buildings that were built since ADA are compliant with entrances and restrooms. But even so, if a person in a wheelchair goes into a restaurant, at least pre-pandemic, seats and tables may be jammed in so tightly that they can't even maneuver, or it may lack a clear path to the restroom, or they may not have tables. You know, they have the cafe tables that are not at wheelchair height. Next slide, please. And if this building was built before ADA, it's even worse. So the bathrooms may be so small, and all of you in New York City know how small bathrooms can be in restaurants. The wheelchairs couldn't fit, or the hallways can be so narrow that it couldn't fit, a power chair couldn't get through. Or I've had experiences where you can get in the front door of a restaurant, but there may be steps inside, the bathroom's downstairs. Next slide. Now, those are restaurants, and you would expect more from healthcare facilities, but in fact, many healthcare facilities claim they're accessible, but they lack exam tables that go up and down, which can be, extremely difficult for patients who have spinal cord injuries or in wheelchairs to transfer onto a table that doesn't go up and down. Exam rooms can be too small for power chairs. It can be cluttered with regular chairs. Mammogram machines are a perfect example of equipment that is not designed, it's only designed for people who are standing. And even something as basic as a clothing hook on a door, they're often placed up high where able-bodied people can reach them, but not wheelchairs. And I bring this out, not only is it important, but I think it tends to discourage, at least in my experience, it tends to discourage people who are in wheelchairs, people with spinal cord injury, for going for routine checks, for medical care, if they feel that the facilities themselves are not accessible. Next slide. It's a process. And may I just say, like, even here at Sinai, when I go through the lobby, the atrium outside the cafeteria, they've put up all these cafe tables for people to eat, kind of socially distant, but there isn't one table that's at wheelchair height. And we're in a hospital that prides itself on diversity and inclusion. And again, I think it's just something maybe people didn't think about because they weren't aware of that. Okay, what do I mean by it's a process? Next slide. Okay, I think that awareness doesn't happen instantly, that there are different stages to it. So the first stage I call the fear zone. And the fear zone is where people are operating sort of on their own beliefs and their own assumptions. And I have found that there's a tendency for all of us, really, to avoid what we fear or what we don't understand. And again, for all of us, we also avoid when we don't know what to say. So in that zone, if people remain in that zone, awareness is stagnant. Next slide, please. Okay, the next zone I call the learning zone. And the learning zone to me is where, people start to become open to challenging these assumptions. They become maybe familiar with ADA. I mean, this is some of the reasons I'm bringing these things up today, is that it starts to make people think twice. They can learn from, like what we're doing today, the webinars, from books, from movies. I mean, I do feel encouraged that there are more and more shows on TV and movies out there that include people in wheelchairs. But I will say the last one, that we learn from people with disabilities themselves. Our best teachers are the reason that I want Yesenia and Woody here with me today, because I think there's something quite powerful about hearing from people themselves. Next slide, please. Okay, and the last stage, is what I call the growth zone. It's where now you've become open, you start to learn that there are other ways of doing things, you've challenged your beliefs, and now is where it starts, like when the beginning, when I said awareness precedes action, now you have some awareness, now comes the action. And to me, that's where the growth happens. So we start to actually not only become open to hearing different things, but we actually start to change our beliefs and assumptions. We start to behave differently. When I knew better, I did better. And you start to see things like hiring people with disabilities. That's an action. I don't know. I've worked here for 30 years, but I really don't see many people, especially in leadership positions, that are in wheelchairs. So I think hiring people with disabilities is a growth zone. I think advocacy, where we listen to the needs of the community and we work together to create change, is another wonderful way for growth. I know Yesenia, when she speaks shortly, she's a huge advocate for the community, and they never exclude able-bodied people from joining them in their advocacy efforts. Next slide, please. And I thought, this would be a nice slide as a segue to introducing Yesenia and Woody. And it's another Maya Angelou quote. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I think one of the most powerful things about hearing from people who are living with a spinal cord injury is you'll never forget how they make you feel. At least that's been my experience. Next slide, I think that was it. Okay, so I would now like to introduce Woody and Yesenia, and they're going to briefly each tell you their story of how they got hurt. And then we're going to explore some of the common myths people have about people in wheelchairs and people with spinal cord injuries and have a discussion about that. So let me introduce Woody. And Woody is someone who I've known now for many years. He works here at Mount Sinai. He's our outreach coordinator and like my right-hand person, co-leading groups with me and helping patients with me on a daily basis, and organizes our Life Challenge program. He's just in our peer mentoring program. He's just such an asset to Mount Sinai. Woody.
Thank you so much, Angela. And thank you everyone for being here and listening and getting our perspective from this subject, because it is without a doubt a very powerful one and one that needs to be addressed on a regular basis. So as Angela mentioned, my name is Woody Wood. That is my name. And I work at Mount Sinai as the outreach program coordinator. Just a little bit about myself very quickly. I was injured on October 11th, 2012. So it's been a little over 9 years now. I was in a hit and run accident while riding my motorcycle, which left me a T12 paraplegic complete. And since that time, in the earlier stages of my accident, I actually was not in an infrastructure that gave me a perception of what it was going to be like moving forward to being in a wheelchair. So in the very beginning, I actually presumed that there wasn't that many people out in the world with one, with this disability, but two, that that were just wheelchair users in general. And that touches on the subject of what Angela was saying earlier about how, and this is coming from me, like I always thought that I was a very open, conscious, moving through the world, seeing people to like in all forms and stages of their lives, and recognizing that, and wanting to be engaged with that. But the simple fact was, even if it was around me, I wasn't aware of it, and of course after my accident, it kind of thrusted me into this beautiful world, which I'm beyond. That's kind of like the silver lining of the things that kind of came through after this accident, of being immersed in this beautiful, wonderful community of people like Yesenia and others that are just amazing in the way that they have just conquered and overcome their situation and moved forward and built something even possibly better than what, and I can say that for myself in my life and what I was doing and where I am now. And again, I'm just happy to share with you and educate in any way possible that I can.
Thanks. Now I'd like to introduce briefly Yesenia, who I've known, it has to be at least 20 years, I think. Yesenia is just a fierce, that's the word that comes to mind. She's a fierce human being, and she has grown into such an amazing woman an advocate for the community, and a recent author of a book that I'm waiting for the English translation eagerly. Yesenia, would you like to briefly share what happened to you?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be a part of these groups to bring awareness, in which I think it's very, very important, because before I got injured, I never had a friend that had a disability. And once I met somebody and he became blind, and I felt pity for that person, I felt sad. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I couldn't even look at him, right? And after my accident, I learned that everybody around me were maybe going to feel that same way, but I wasn't going to let them feel pity for me. So as I was learning, I was teaching a lot of people. Let me tell you a little bit of what happened to me first. I was in a car accident. It's been 26 years. I was 21 years old. You can make the math. I look good right at my age, maybe. So it's been a long time. I'm a C4, C5, incomplete, tetraplegic. I don't have the use of my hands, but believe me, I do a lot. Even though I cannot grab, I make things happen. It was a car trip, a girl's car trip. I wanted to do this for such a long time. I'm a movie lover, so I always saw it and I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna do my first car trip with the girls. It didn't come out good. I got into an accident, car accident, and I got into my level of injury. Like I said before, returning to the story, um, as I was learning, I didn't have nobody to teach me. When I was let go from the hospital, it was like, oh my gosh, a new world for me, and a new world in which I have so many eyes on, like on top of me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm on the spot. What am I supposed to do? But I did take it slow, and I was very conscious that before, when I was in that situation, I felt pity for the person, and I was going to make sure nobody was going to feel pity for me, because we're going to learn together and we're going to make this happen. So as I was bringing awareness to my household, it became bigger and bigger and made me stronger and stronger.
Well, it's funny because one of the myths, as we jump into the myths, was exactly that people who are paralyzed, or people who are in wheelchairs, are depressed people, or sad people, or people you should feel sorry for. And you just already just said, no, I've actually known someone who told me that they were sitting on the street and somebody just came and put money in their lap.
Yeah, that actually happened to me. That happened to me. I mean, that came up like exactly. And also to expand on that is, or they think that you're sick, that you're unhealthy, that you're unwell. And just like you said, Angela, and this was maybe 2 years or so after my accident, and I was at some appointment. I was just on the side of the road waiting for my ride, on the sidewalk, waiting for my ride to show up. And a woman came up and offered me $1. I'm like, and what was so funny about it, I was on a brand new iPhone. So, I'm like,
but you see, there lies the assumption, these assumptions that people have, that people in wheelchairs, they're to be pitied. They probably don't work. I mean, we'll get to that one. I feel sorry for you. Here, buddy, take $1. The second one you alluded to, the second myth is that people in wheelchairs are likely cognitively impaired, or somehow sick and ill. And there was another gentleman that told me that the people would come up, whether they were a doctor's office, healthcare facility, anywhere they were in the world, and they would speak to his home attendant and not to him. Now, whether that was discomfort with speaking to someone in a wheelchair because you feel uncomfortable, or whether it was that they really believed that this person, there's something wrong with them because they're in the chair, I'm going to speak to the aide. And finally, the person in the wheelchair said, my aide is Spanish speaking only. Why don't you talk to me? I speak English. And it just sort of absurd. But again, I think people are well-intentioned here, but sort of off the mark because they don't have the awareness. They don't have the expectations and the knowledge of what people can do and what people are all about, wheelchairs.
And also the uncomfortability around the whole subject as well, I think.
Like in terms of what, like how, like some people have actually said to me, how, I don't know how to talk to someone in a wheelchair. Is that what you're kind of referring to?
Right. Is that uncomfortable of just like how, like what to say, what not to say, you know, all these factors which is why we are here right now.
Right. Well, you know what we'll do? I'll just go through some of these myths and then we'll talk about disability etiquette, about what you say and not say. Okay. So another one I have here, and then I'm just going to throw them out. If you're paralyzed, you can't drive.
Well, we know that's far from true.
Maybe, but really, like some people may be thinking, well, you can't move your legs. How do you drive?
So I would like to share this story, and of course that was in my early stages of my injury. That's what I thought too. I thought it's like, I mean, you know, in the early stages, you're and again not being exposed to the community or anything of that nature. Like I'm not going to be able to travel anymore. I'm not going to be able to drive anymore. A lot of my independence is going to be taken away. And like the very first person who he's huge in the community, his name is Alex Elagudin. He was the very first person in a wheelchair that I met. Now, mind you, this guy is a high level, I believe like a C5. Is that accurate?
Yes.
C5, complete quadriplegic. This guy showed up at my door driving an accessible van, and I was just like dumbfounded, like by himself, by the way, by himself on his own. And I was just like, it literally just, and I'm already in a wheelchair, and it put me into a perspective of like, I don't know anything that's going on that is wrapped around this disability.
That's perfect. All right, you mentioned travel. So another myth is, well, if you're in a wheelchair, you can't travel, you can't get on an airplane. What do you say to that?
I travel a lot, and I'm actually organizing a trip to San Diego with my siblings because I need a break. I've been doing too much, so I really need a break. And
I was going to say, some people may say, but you're in a wheelchair. How do you get on an airplane? What do you do?
everything is out there for us. There's special service for us. We go to the counter, we say that we're in a wheelchair. If we want, we could take our own wheelchair, or they could put us on a service wheelchair. For the aisle, there's an aisle wheelchair, so it's very narrow. So what they do is they take you to the entrance of the airplane. They transfer you to that narrow, small little wheelchair, and they, bring you through the aisle, and they help you. They sit you. They're trained to do this. So like whoever wants to go out, like there's no buts. There really isn't, because there's help out there.
Woody, do you want to add anything about travel?
Yeah, and I'll even further that because I traveled abroad as well, and that always kind of sparks up, like certain areas that are accessible, and there are, you do run into certain situations. The last place I traveled to, this was a couple of years ago, was Poland. And there are elements that were very accessible, and there are other elements that weren't. And there lies, like within that, within just the people around you, and just putting yourself out there. You just work it out. It's you work through the obstacles that are presented in front of you, and actually it kind of brings awareness to the people around you as well, that you're kind of showing them that things are possible in a wheelchair. If you can't get into the train that has a narrow entrance, is like, okay, how we're going to do this? Well, okay, we're going to lift you up, bring your chair in behind you. There's always a way to overcome the obstacle that is put in front of you. You just have to have the tenacity to roll into it.
Right.
I have an example of traveling. I went to India to an abroad program for like a month and a half. Imagine India. Not
Yeah.
easy. The people not easy. OMG. I was in a rickshaw. You know what a rickshaw is? Like two, two, two wheels in the back, one in the front, like a little scooter. They had to put me in my head first in and then my body in, and I had to hold on to two people on the side, and my wheelchair was in another rickshaw. And I would do this for the full month, and I was okay with it as long as I had somebody to say, Yesenia, I'm gonna help you. I was like, head in first, guys, and then the body. But we did it, and everybody was like, OMG.
And I
I
want,
love, yes, go ahead, Mary.
yeah, there's a comment in the Q&A that I wanted to share, 'cause I think this is a good time. My father was in a wheelchair for 10 years. He was told he would never walk again. He was in a war in Cuba against Fidel's regime, and his whole platoon was killed. He himself was shot in the head and 7 other places throughout his body. He lived and was left permanently paralyzed on the entire left side of his body. He learned to live his life in a wheelchair, but eventually was able to get up and walk semi with dragging his left side. Awareness is key. People would feel sorry for my father, but he learned to share his story and tell people this did not stop him from living his life, from having children to being a working man, driving and swimming. I appreciate this meeting so much. And along those lines, I think Woody and Yesenia, I may have heard your story before about how it was like for you in the hospital, about how people, you know, in the hospital were, what they were giving you, what information they were not giving you, and maybe if you can share about a little bit about that, what your experience was in the hospital and your recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. My biggest one is when I was taken to the emergency room at Bellevue. That was one of the staples of what not to do as a doctor with a newly injured patient. And what that was while this is like immediately after my injury, this doctor found it appropriate to bring in like a room full of med students to address my situation in the state that I was in. Now, one that disregards my emotional state, my mental and emotional state of where I was at that time. I'm not suggesting that at other times it's not appropriate to do that, maybe at a later time with med, because I understand that there's facilities that have, like in educating med students is a very important thing, but there is an absolute time for doctors to recognize and to have empathy for the individual, seeing the individual as a human being and taking into account of like what they are going through in that moment, and honoring that, you know. And by the way, like what transpired after that, my uncle, who was with me and who also worked, well, at that time he worked in the medical field around Manhattan and throughout, and they immediately transferred me out of there into NYU. Because
what did they ask, what did they say to you though? Like that was really
like, well, I mean, the problem, I only remember fragments because they had me highly medicated for obvious reasons. I was laying in a boat, but what he was basically stating that I would never walk again. And you know, I think he was giving me some technical terms, but I couldn't, I wasn't in a state to really cognitively. But what I did, what the overtone of what was the lack of empathy, like, and where this guy was coming from was not for my betterment, it was for the betterment of him and his staff. And I absolutely felt that. And you know, it's funny, I'm currently down in Florida right now, and my uncle is down here, and we were just having a conversation revisiting that. And in my mind, I thought it was like very diplomatic, and he was like, "Oh no, you were a bit more I basically told the doctor that I needed him and his staff to leave the room so I can just take in what he just shared with me.
Right.
And when I first told him that, he still talked to me. He was just like, and again, it was kind of like that peanut gallery, like the wah, 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 wah. That's all I was really hearing at that time. And then I composed myself to say, I heard what you said. I need you to leave and give me a moment. And that was that.
Right. Well, I think the key word there is empathy.
Yeah.
And it even ties back to like when people feel pity, that's very different. When people feel sympathy, that's very different than empathy. Empathy is just having the compassion for another human being, whereas like, pity is like feeling sorry for someone, and they're very, very different.
Absolutely.
Is that what Yesenia, do you want to share anything about your medical experience initially?
Well, it was something like his situation, that the first thing that they did said to me after I got out of surgery was these two guys. I don't even know who they were. They weren't even my doctors, and they did the same thing, but it was like a joke to them. I thought that I was like with comedians, because they were talking to each other like, yeah, right, she's not gonna walk again. No, she should stay like that. She should make, like, they were back and forth, and I'm like, hello, I'm here, it's me. And I did the same thing. I'm like, leave right away. I was hysterical. And I even asked my mom to, she pushed them out of the room because it was so insensitive. And I saw that like a joke, like they're playing with my life. Who are they? Who are these people? So it happened to me.
Right. I mean, and to Woody's point, when he came in, it's like awareness is not just it's for all of us. Even highly educated, doctors may not exactly be aware of what you're experiencing. And even though we expect that, it may not always be the case. And I think it's important. That's why we do this in the medical school, for young doctors to hear about the importance of empathy and the importance of compassion. And ultimately, when you ask patients like what they need most from their doctor, that's what they'll say. They'll say, someone who cares, someone who's empathic, someone who has compassion. But anyway, I want to just swing back to a myth that is very important to me, and I know is important to both these two people. And it's a very common one. And Woody knows where I'm going with this.
It's coming.
But it's coming. People in wheelchairs, people who are paralyzed can't have sex. Well, they're laughing because, is that true or not true?
No, that's the furthest from the truth ever. I have a very active sex life with my lover. So,
and it's even better now.
Yeah.
Now
okay,
it's much better.
Now I'm going to follow up with two questions, because there may be people on this that are thinking, okay, wait a minute. First of all, how? Because you're paralyzed. And second of all, how could it possibly be better if you don't have sensation? So we'll go. Okay, Woody, want to take that? And then we'll go to Yesenia?
No, I'll let Yesenia
go first.
Yeah, let Yesenia go first.
Okay, as a female, ladies first. As a female, we're used to being, the cute one and the pampered one and the doll. And when this came to me at the moment that I started hearing people like, oh my gosh, this is so cool, I could flip her around and do this, and then I'm like, wow, that is so nasty. So what I could share with you guys is that when I'm in a relationship and when I have intimacy, which becomes very important, more than like intercourse, the intimacy is like getting to know the person. So my partner gets to know me, gets to know every single part of my body, even the way I look, that I'm looking at them, the way they smell, the words, everything. This intimacy becomes very, very powerful. And it doesn't mean that it's for people that have a disability or could feel or not feel. Yes, there's things that I cannot feel clearly, but just with the intimacy and getting to that grade with your partner, it becomes beyond. And I'll just leave it at that. You continue.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, obviously from a male perspective, you know, obviously, and not to say like I felt like I was very in tune before my accident with you know being able to pleasure a woman and being in tune with my body and pleasure and extending that and expanding on that as much as I can. So yes, as Yesenia said, like when I lost the sensation around my penis and in that area, you know, that struck up of like, you know, so what is like, where is this going to go? Like, where do you find the pleasures and the joys of, and like, you know, further to have orgasms and all that. And just like, for me, it was developing a relationship with my partner, my lover, in a way that was so with like exploring the just continuously exploring the possibilities. And I will say right out the gate that intimacy with somebody in a wheelchair is about as kinky as you can get, and in the most beautiful way. Tapping into all the senses, and this is where it really heightened my awareness of intimacy, was not just the feeling sensation, which that does you just restructure that over time, but also the sense of smell, the sense of taste, the sound, what you're visually seeing, everything around you is just kind of heightened. You're tapping into that with your partner. And obviously you need somebody, as Yesenia says, you're getting to know someone on a deeper level, and they just have to be connected with you and willing to go to that place with you and explore. And I can 150% say that my sexual experiences has elevated like to a level that I could have never even possibly imagined.
You know, I think hopefully like just hearing both of you will raise a certain level of awareness, I think, for many people as to what's possible, even doctors. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
I do want to touch a little on disability etiquette because I promised that I would. And I think a lot of people are very curious about this kind of thing. Like they want to help. They're good people. They don't know, like, should I ask for help? Should I not ask for help? You know, should I open the door for them? Should I not open the door for them? Like those kind of things. Like, do you have any advice for people who are good people, well-intentioned, but don't know quite where the limits are or how to approach the situation?
I'm actually a disability etiquette and awareness coordinator at my job, and I do these trainings. And the first thing that I could tell anybody, and like anybody that is curious, just ask first. Ask, how can I help you? Do you need help? You're gonna get some people like, do you really think I need help? What's wrong with you? So be careful. Don't take it personal. It's maybe their bad day, but you would never go wrong if you ask the person, if you see that there's a need or it's a need for you to help. Ask them, hi, how are you? Do you need some help? And how can I help you? Those are the two major questions. Do you need help and how can I help you? Because sometimes people just, out of good faith, they just want to push your wheelchair and you're like, please, this is like 350 pounds, my wheelchair. You're going to damage your back. Like you cannot just go into it. You have to have that conversation and ask how and if you do need the help.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I can't really add more than that. It's just not being afraid to go up and offer the assistance. And I have this all the time because I do drive. Going back to what Angela, I drive. I transfer into a car. I break down my wheelchair, and people, they come up to me all the time and ask if it's like, can I assist you with that? And I'm always like very like overly just extending like the appreciation that they took the time to come up, because I know at some other point, if somebody does need the assistance, that you don't want, like to sway them not to do that. So I'm very grateful for them taking the time. I've even had people, when I was in New York City, like transferring into my car, they would stop traffic, get out of their car, and ask if I needed assistance. I was like, dude, you better get back in the car, or somebody behind you is gonna get this. But all joking aside, it's always best to ask. And even what Yesenia said about, I mean, 9 times out of 10, you're gonna get a decent response back.
Is there anything that people shouldn't do or shouldn't say, or something that yes, Yesenia?
Words. Disabled, that word disabled. Let me just give you some information, because we do use it. It's even illegal to use disabled.
Really? Yeah, I didn't know that.
It's illegal to use disabled. It was brought up in court and things like that. So always put the person before the disability. So you would say Yesenia that has this disability, not Yesenia Yesenia the disabled. No, she has a disability. First the person and then the disability. Always, that's like the key to everything. To when you're talking, put the person first. Don't just call them blind or because that's very dismissive. It comes from a time where people with disabilities were a burden. They didn't have a life. People felt pity. They were seen as sick people and things like that. So when we bring it back to this century, because that was like in the 1900s, you bring it, and you're bringing with a lot of luggage. So we do not like the disabled portion, or everything that's degrading. No, because we want to be us. We are us. We're out there. We're individuals. We're smart. We do everything and everything with a different form of doing it, but our disability does not define us. So please do not define us with those words. Crippled. There's a list. I actually have a big list in what words not to say. Just remember that little code: person before the disability.
Wheelchair bound is another big one. And Yesenia nailed it. It's just like, we're in a time now, and listen, there are, and I'll throw my hat in this ring, is that like people with their disabilities, whatever, regardless, they're doing more than able-bodied people out in the world are doing. It's like the wheelchair or whatever the person's disability is does not define who they are. It's just a part of their life, and that again is what is the recognition. Is just see me for who I am, and I think that's a sense of like, when you see Yesenia and myself, and I know for myself, when I roll into any place, they're not seeing my wheelchair, they're seeing me. They're seeing who I am. And that's what needs to be addressed. Is like, oh, look at, and the wheelchair just comes with me. It's just a part of it.
What about that
tool? It's your tool.
It is your tool. The word wheelchair bound, it's the bound word that upsets me, because Woody, just in terms of sports, that was the other thing. People, if you're in a wheelchair, you can't play sports, you can't swim, you can't. Can you just briefly speak to that? Like what sports you play?
I'm an avid, that is something that I do, like through my, working at Mount Sinai, is I introduce people to all the different adaptive sports and activities that are out there. And in myself, like participating, so I water ski, I wakeboard, I mono ski, I've skydived, I've done whitewater rafting. I'm an adventurous guy, and that's the whole point. Before my accident, I was I'm an adrenaline junkie. These are the things that I did before, And I didn't mention this, but this was really a really strong part of my own personal rehabilitation, quote unquote, or just restructuring my life and getting back to that place that I was. And it was one of my closest friends. He's my cosmic brother. He got me an adaptive device to put on my wakeboard, and not even a year after my accident, I was back in the water relearning how to wakeboard again.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the things that, again, like people don't, and I find it kind of hard to believe, honestly, because you can see now, especially with the Paralympics that just passed and everything that's going on, is like, you can see what is going on out there right now. There is a lot of, I mean, these guys that are pushing the envelope, regardless of what their physical restrictions are, they're doing things that, again, most able bodies aren't able to do, or most people without any kind of mobility restrictions. So,
well, that's where I said visibility increases awareness. There is a power to being seen, and when people are seen, things change.
Absolutely.
Now, I don't know if there are any other questions in the chat.
No, there aren't any more. Oh, something just popped up.
All right.
Okay. Do you feel like there is discrimination among the wheelchair using community, among lifelong wheelchair users, and those that have had an incident or accident occur that caused it? So,
Wait, I'm not quite clear about the question.
yeah. So do you feel there's discrimination among the wheelchair using community between, I think they're asking for people who are who use wheelchair lifelong versus people, I guess, that are temporarily using wheelchair.
Like they don't have a permanent disability, or?
Yeah, Michelle, if that's the question, if you want to type in something to clarify that question, or had an accident.
I mean, we often can play, like in groups. I run groups that have a variety of people, like that are quadriplegic versus paraplegic. So some people can use their hands, some people can't. We have incompletes, where people that are walking, we're all mixed in together. And I think at times, that issue comes up, that sometimes a quadriplegic may say to a paraplegic, you don't really understand, what it's like if you don't have hands. And what I try to do is I try to get people to focus on the feelings instead of the specifics. So we all know what loss feels like. We all know, certain things, and we connect that way. But I think people in wheelchairs are the same as people who are walking around. There are going to be people that do have resentments, that haven't worked through their issues, whether they're in a wheelchair or whether they're walking. So yeah, I think there may be some discrimination within the wheelchair community, just like there is within any community, because people are people. So
Yeah.
raising awareness, it applies to people in wheelchairs too. So
Absolutely.
I work the other end. I work the end of people in wheelchairs have to be more aware of each other and their own things, and even of able-bodied people. We have to be aware of people that don't understand. So awareness can go in many different ways.
And may I touch a little bit more on that? Let's injury didn't change the person that I am.
Right.
And that goes for a lot of people, like within, so like if somebody's working through whatever like emotional or mental issues, like being out in the world, that's going to follow them post injury as well, and maybe even amplify that. So, I mean, I just had to throw that out there. It's like, the person that I was like, and still am, like a very optimistic, positive person that is a go-getter. And, I'm not saying like in the early stages of my injury, it wasn't challenging for me to rediscover myself. And I had to go through my dark times mentally and emotionally, but the underlying current was like that essence of me, to push me through, to build me back up, to get to the space that I am, and to continue to push forward, to be a better person in the world.
I would like to add something, because I get that a lot. I get that, oh, but you're doing so good because you're lucky, because you're social, because you're this, and that. And I'm like, no, it's not that I'm lucky. It's that I work for what I want. Like I envision myself, I want to get there and I go there. Now, if you want me, because I'm that type that I'm a leader and I want to bring people with me. I want people to be in the same stage that I'm at. So when they go to me that you're lucky, this is not luck. This is me fighting for what I want and reaching and doing, you know, bringing my dreams to life. And I could show you if you're ready, whenever you're ready. I've said this to a lot of people, and some has knocked on the door and they're like, okay, I did my resume, I did this, because for them, since it's like very few of us that we have gotten to certain stages in life that other people would like to, they see it very difficult. But since we're advocates and we're here to empower our own community, I always invite them, oh, you want to do this? You want to get a good job? You want, and I lead them and I show them the way, but they have to work for it because I can't give them, and it's not luck. You have to work for it.
Right.
So that's something important.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, thank you. Dr. Ricabona,
Well,
is there anything else you want to add? Any closing
No.
words?
I just want to really thank you for the Office of Inclusion and Diversity and Inclusion for doing these disability awareness seminars. I think that, you know, these are things that help people understand things from a different perspective, and hopefully, you know, when people know better, they'll do better. And hearing it from people who are living the experience is a very different, at least for me, it's a very visceral experience when I hear from people, as opposed to, not that I'm not interesting, but, you know, I'm able-bodied. So, you know, I can only talk from a certain place. So I really just appreciate your openness to having all of us come on, and for all the hard work it took to put this whole group of seminars on. I'm sure it was quite an undertaking. So, so thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much
Thank
for your
you.
time, for Woody and Yesenia, and for you know, taking the time to educate us and share your experiences. And I want to thank everybody who hung in there. And if you have any questions, you know, you can find Woody or Dr. Riccobono or me in Outlook. And
Absolutely.
yeah, and if you want to get in touch with Yesenia, just let one of us know and we can make the connections.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
everyone,
so
for being here.
much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.